We're going to talk about things not related to analytics or SEO or qualified sales, flux capacitors, or anything like that. We're going to talk about experience and really kind of at a meta level. So obviously kind of filtered through the web in general, because that's what we're talking about today. But how experience and designing experiences, even for the web, transcend the web. So a little bit of context so you can choose whether or not you want to listen to what I'm saying. I run a UX and brand strategy consulting firm in Indy called KA+A. And we work with lots of really cool businesses. Most of them are venture-funded, technology-focused startups. So they're companies like KA+A or Compendium or FormSpring or ExactTarget and those types of guys. Started a couple software companies, one called Pathagility, one called Tinderbox. And I have started a handful of seed stage venture capital funds that invest in software companies, predominantly local. We've got 2 funds in Indy and 1 fund in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is where I, oddly enough, make my home half the time. So yeah, so there's a little background. So I don't really have a good feel for kind of what the demographic or the vocational makeup of the attendees are here. I know there's some big companies, little companies, and operational folks and technical folks. But in an attempt to not talk under anyone's kind of pay grade or over somebody's pay grade, forgive me as I go through a little bit of definition here. You hear this term kind of user experience and customer experience and brand experience and experience design kind of bantered about, and they're becoming kind of useless words because they're used in so many different contexts with so many different intents. It's kind of like brand was a really cool word 20 years ago because the few people out there who knew what it meant knew what it meant. There was kind of a common understanding of what it represented, and now brand means everything, right? So I mean, the guy who prints your mouse pads is in branding, right? As well as the guy who paints billboards or designs logos or picks out what color the couch in the receptionist area is going to be. And the same thing's beginning to happen with experience, but I would argue that it's all experience, right? So the color of the couch in the lobby actually is part of the experience and does really matter. And how cool your mouse pads are probably has some bearing on that as well. So here is my definition. Now, you guys, there's people who would argue with me about this, and that's terrific. But having done this for the better part of a decade, this is the most cogent, concise kind of definition we've come up with, which is it's an approach to the conceptual and literal design of products, processes, services, and environments. What's interesting is if you work in the software world, and the term UX or XD is thrown around, what they probably mean is what it's going to look like, right? So what color is the button going to be? Where's the button going to be located? You know, you guys have heard, I'll make the logo bigger, yada, yada, yada. Our contention is that it's the entire continuum of your business, and increasingly the web kind of sits at the center of that. The other kind of contrarian statement I would make is that experience design is less a methodology and more of a philosophy. So in an attempt to command higher fees and justify the graduate programs that have sprung up around the nation's universities, designers have tried to turn UX into this, you know, methodology, right? So, you know, 1 + 1 = 2 every time. I would argue that it probably doesn't work that way, and that it's a bit more of a philosophical bent. And I'm not saying it's art or anything hokey like that. What I am saying is if you follow this kind of tract of design thinking where everything is this kind of measurable, quantifiable process, and as long as we do everything in the right order, you know, the sausage is going to look okay when it comes out of the other end of the machine, is probably not true. And I think that organizations that do the best job of integrating the design of total experiences are the ones that have a bit of a looser approach, where everyone in the organization feels some sense of responsibility and everyone's educated on it, and that it's not just a step, you know, in the process. This is one of my favorite all-time quotes by Jim Wicks, which is, the product is the brand, right? You build brand in our industry through the product and the experience. in a traditional organization, I don't care if you're making widgets or if you're selling software or if you're selling consulting services or healthcare or pharmaceuticals, there's product development and there's marketing, right? And typically those are on opposite ends of the poles. I would argue that they're the same exact thing today. In today's world, brand is product and product is brand. There's no distinction between the box and what's in it. And the reason for that is that the box informs customers' opinion about the value of what's in the box. So it's the whole kind of reality and perception thing. And they can't be divorced. I've been saying this for years, hoping that it would catch on in some way. This quote would be attributed to me. It has not happened yet, so if any of you guys want to tweet about this and put my name at the bottom, that'd be terrific. I'm only partly kidding. But the interface is the product, is the experience is the brand. The idea there is that it's all one continuum. And if you've got branding, quote unquote, marketing people, and you've got product people, which are the engineers or the scientists that are inventing new molecules or what have you, you're missing the boat because it's all one thing. So I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the particulars about, and this is all in service of these case studies we'll talk about in a moment, but what it is and what it ain't. Experience design is not about making sure the buttons are in the right place. It's not about plotting the shortest distance between points. It's not about selecting from 41 shades of blue. And does anyone know what I'm talking about when I say that, by the way? Yeah, right. So a few designers in the house, right? So Google famously went through this kind of very heavy quant-focused test of which shade of blue converted most effectively for their links, right? And apparently they discovered that one has a slight 0.00097 edge on the other one. It is not, and this is an important distinction, it is not giving people what they say they want, and it is not just a step in the process. But it is about the intersection of branding, product development, and business strategy. It is about, much like theater, cultivating anticipation and desire. It's about making things that sometimes users don't love the first time they see it. And this is why I'm a bit of a contrarian from some of my peers that are focused on usability in particular, which is, I don't think the most usable thing's always the best thing. I don't think the easiest thing's always the best thing, but that's all you hear about when you hear about experience design, interface design, usability, is all about kind of dumbing it down. I'm not saying that there's not a right time to do that, because there is, but that should not be your lodestone or exclusively your North Star. XD is the stuff that everyone else thinks is somebody else's problem, right? So how many of you guys, we'll just take a really simple example, are involved in the design or the development of websites, either for your own business or for your clients' businesses? Okay, so lots of folks. A great example is the designer who gets the content for the contact page and looks at the way that intro sentence is parsed and thinks to himself, man, what knucklehead wrote that? That's an inarticulate or inelegant turn of phrase, and then doesn't change it, or doesn't go get permission to change it, or doesn't go talk to the copywriter or the project manager, and who just puts it in, right? Every step in that continuum has got to be everybody else's problem as well as your own. So everyone's got to be worrying about it. It is about the design of systems, and some of the folks that have spoken today have begun to touch on that, right? As it relates specifically to things like maintenance and updates and keeping things fresh. But I'm talking about even more blown out than that. Systems that are bigger than kind of maintenance systems. The ecosystem that exists outside of the web itself, right? So what other kind of artifacts would your customers interface with, or experiences would they have that relate to the website? So maybe it's after they find the phone number on the website, what happens when they actually call that number, right? That is part of the experience that ultimately will be ascribed to the brand, right? And therefore, if we just think about things in terms of, well, I work on the website, right? And you're not getting involved, sometimes even against your boss's will, in what's happening in other parts of the system, you're missing a big opportunity. And then finally, it is about the details, but it's also focused on the big picture. You know, the famous furniture designer, architect, innovator, Eames said, the details aren't the details, they're the design, right? I mean, they're everything. So you can't get into this point, to this position of saying you'll worry about the details later. There is a balance between focusing on the big picture and the little things. So I think I've already hit on this probably, right? But it's not a layer, it's not a component, it's about the whole system. And if you look at, and I can promise you guys that this, I will only mention Apple in this presentation one time. I typically make that promise, and I typically fail to live up to it, but I think I can do it this time. So looking at examples of this, because people will say, well, yeah, I mean, but we've got a little software as a service company. It's really simple. We never talk to our clients. We don't have any real-world products. I mean, the experience really is about what color the buttons are. And I would say, well, that's probably not entirely accurate, right? Now, at the top of the technology and innovation food chain, we have a company like Nike. But I use this example, and it's overused, and it's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, because it so beautifully illustrates this idea of systems thinking and design thinking, which was the iPod success wasn't about the iPod. As a matter of fact, in early focus groups, customers actually hated the iPod. They didn't like it was white, because technology devices aren't supposed to be white. It had that paddle wheel thing, which was a brand new construct that people weren't familiar with. And the bottom line is, people said, we're not crazy about this. We don't get it. And Jobs said, I don't care. You're going to learn to love it, which I think is a key element in experience design and designing for consumers, which is if you just give customers what they want, what do they get? What did Henry Ford say? Does anyone remember? If I'd given the customer what he wanted, it would have been a faster horse, right? You can't just listen to what customers say they want. Sometimes you've got to grab them by the bit and lead them a little bit. But what made the iPod killer wasn't the iPod. There were lots of cool MP3 players that hit the market, obviously before the iPod. There was a Diamond Rio, which you could buy for 49 bucks at Best Buy. And if you ripped it open and looked at what was inside, you would notice that from a component perspective, it was almost identical to Apple's device. What made the iPod was all the other crap that was around the iPod, right? It was the box, right? You know, there's an entire website dedicated to people taking Apple products out of their boxes, right? It's called unboxing, right? The box, it was the retail experience, right? When you went into that store and bought it, it was the fact that when you plugged it in for the very first time, it said, well, you don't have iTunes installed. Would you like to download iTunes? And that way you can enjoy access to tens of thousands of blah, 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 right? So that continuum just kept stretching, and they haven't stopped, right? Then they figured out a way to connect it to your footwear, right? And then they created a social network around sharing music, and now there's the Mac store or the App Store for the Mac, and it's just a perfect example of building an ecosystem that feeds all of the discrete parts. Xbox 360 is another, it's a little more dumbed down, but another great example, right? I mean, this is not just, and I could say Xbox 360, I could say Nintendo Wii, take your pick, right? It's not the device, it's not what's in the device, it's not the fact that they chose Blu-ray instead of HD DVD, which that one's already dead, so I don't have to remember what it's called, but it was things like changing the way people interface with the product, right? It was about the fact that I can now rent Netflix movies, which doesn't have anything to do on the surface with high-performance gaming. And then, you know, obviously all the interactions you can have in real time with other folks. Things that transcended kind of the core product is what makes the product transcendent, if that makes any sense. So the idea then, if we all agree that experience is the most important thing, is that everything has to support it. And if anything's not supporting it, it's detracting from it. Have any of you guys ever flown Virgin Atlantic or Virgin America? Okay. Well, you should. Next time you're heading over to Wee Paris or whatever on a giant, you should fly this airline. And if you're never going to fly it, go online and read about it, because it's super duper fascinating. Obviously, it's Richard Branson's, one of his brain children, along with colas and cell phones and music labels and space travel and all the other stuff that he's doing. They looked at air travel and they said, all right, well, all the stuff that every other organization is trying to differentiate itself around is the stuff that you got to do well to be an airline, right? You got to find room to squeeze people onto the plane. You got to figure out a way to operate at a profit, which we would argue that the majority of them still haven't cracked the code on. You've got to do it safely. Your on-time departures and arrivals need to fall within some realm of acceptability. And everyone's fighting about this, right? Everyone's fighting about, we have a little bit more leg room, or we'll charge you half as much to check your bag. I mean, that's what passes for differentiation in the airline industry today. But fundamentally, the product is the same. It's a big, freakish aluminum tube with tens of thousands of pounds of highly flammable jet fuel that you get crammed onto that gets you from point A to point B, and they generally cost the same amount of money, right? And Virgin said, no, we think we can differentiate. We think we can change people's perception about the product without changing the product, but by changing everything that is wrapped around it. Because the product is travel, right? I mean, that fundamentally is what you're buying when you buy an airline ticket. You're buying teleportation. You're buying a promise that they will move you from point A to point B. And Virgin kind of flipped the script, right? So they said, we're going to make it around not just service, but crazy sex appeal infused service, right? So if you fly first class, they put you in a Range Rover and drive you from the first class lounge to the plane where you board through a separate entrance from us commoners that are on business class or sitting in steerage in the back. They invested an insane amount of money on mood lighting. Right? They hired a famous designer to design these uniforms. They sent these stewardesses, flight attendants, I'm a product of the 70s people, so cut me some slack, to etiquette school, right? The food is different. The seats are different. The upholstery is different. These are their barf bags, right? So they commissioned 25 world-famous designers and illustrators to actually illustrate redesign their, air sickness bags or whatever, right? Whereas no other airline on the planet would ever think to do that, right? I mean, all you've got on the back of Deltas or Americans or Continentals is, where it was printed in China, right? And then their logo on the front. And that's great, isn't it? Because you're staring at American's logo while you're puking into this bag, right? So great brand recall, great brand love. These guys created a limited edition, and so there is a secondary market to trade these. They're so coveted, right? But it's just an example of paying attention to the details and realizing that everything informs people's value about your product, whether it's a website or an airline for that matter. So to kind of continue on my orthodoxy busting tour here, I would argue there's a huge focus on conversion, right? Conversion. Should the button be bigger? Should the button be smaller? We want to increase conversions. I mean, people are killing themselves to get a 1-point bump in conversions, which I think is, and once again, I realize this is heretical. Bjorn's on his way to pull me out right now. I think it's stupid. I think it's a mistake. I'm sure there are some examples. If you're selling cheap sunglasses on a generic website, that's terrific. But if you're selling something of value, I would argue that this obsession on short-term conversion can lead to slow losses. This is a great illustration. This is a Lexus dealership in Boca that they actually put a 3-hole golf course around, and anyone's invited to come play on it. They just want people to come and associate with the brand and get a good vibe, and eventually someone's going to roll in there and buy a sled, as opposed to, whoever that guy is, who's got an awesome jacket, but I do not trust him. So here's another example. This is a bank called Commerce Bank, which, once again, if anyone's interested, and no one's nodding off yet, so I'll gloss over things if I see people making really overt statements of being worn out. But the Harvard Business School did a case study on these guys that you can Google that is totally fascinating. So this is a bank. This is not a website. That was started back in the 80s, and at one period they were the biggest bank on the East Coast. Actually, I believe they were the biggest bank in the country that had grown through organic growth, meaning they did not go out and buy a bunch of community banks. But what makes these guys really interesting to me, and what makes them a relevant case study when talking about experience design, is that they were the ultimate contrarians. First of all, during the rise of online banking, they said, we don't really believe in online banking. They said, we believe that banking is fundamentally a retail business, and it's about relationships, and we want people to come to our branches. Now, what's interesting about this, and you've seen some banks, you have the guy in like the flannel shirt sitting on a tractor talking about how, he's the president of the local community bank, and it's all about relationships. But if you go back 20 years, nobody was talking about that. People were talking about, how do we shut down our retail operations, move everything to the web, efficiencies, efficiencies, efficiencies. And Commerce Bank said, no, we're going to buck that trend. So they focused on retail and building spaces. The other really, really interesting thing they did was that they decided they always wanted to pay the worst interest rates in any given community. So when they set up a bank, they wanted to make sure that nobody was coming to them because they paid the highest interest rate on CDs and money markets and savings accounts. As a matter of fact, if they moved into a community where there was a bank that paid a worse interest rate, you know what they did? They made theirs even worse, right? And they advertised that. And the idea was they don't want crappy customers. So the people who really, really, really care about low interest rates also are most likely to contribute to your attrition. On average, they switch banks every 6 months. And Commerce Bank knew that that equals a bad customer, right? There's lots of examples of that, right? I mean, there's really great CRM systems that will tell you the lifetime value of a customer, throw a bunch of dollar signs up next to it on the website because Bob ordered $10,000 worth of shoes last year. What it doesn't tell you is that Bob returned $950 or $9,950 worth of those shoes, right? So you got to look at more than one dimension to understand what a good customer is. These guys knew that getting people into the store was going to shape people's perceptions about the bank. When y'all were kids, do you remember being able to go into the bank with a sack of nickels and giving it to them, and then they would give you the cash or whatever they put it in that machine? If you can find a bank that will do that today, they will take 10% of it, right? That's the way it works. So what did Commerce Bank do? They set up something called the Penny Arcade in their lobbies, which was free. You didn't have to be a customer. Anyone could walk into their lobby, dump their sack of change into it, and get a little receipt, take it to the cashier, and get 100% of whatever their change was worth, right? They realized that you made transcendent experiences by surrounding your core product with beautiful details, right? So that's as about a non-technology example as I could dig up. So there's a really cool angel investor, super angel investor in the Valley named Dave McClure, who has got his firm's called 500 Startups, if any of you guys are familiar with it or interested. But he talks about the changing dynamic in the world of software and technology and web applications in general, which is really that the economics of starting a business and the economics of building software and building applications have changed fundamentally. So Chris Baggett, to get our Exact Target friends' ears perked up in here, I see you checking your email, buddy, all right, so I'm on you, is famous for saying that if Exact Target had wanted to build their current product 20 years ago, it would have taken 100 engineers and $15 million. When they built it 8-9 years ago, I'm losing track of time, but it was a while ago, it took ultimately 50 engineers and $7 million. If they'd wanted to do it 4 years ago, it would have taken 10 engineers and $1 million. And literally today, you could have built what they had 8 years ago today with a couple of guys and $500,000, right? So the economics of building software has changed. As a result, what used to be a differentiator was we're the only guys that can build it, or we're the only guys who have enough money to build it, is no longer a differentiator. Differentiators now are around design and marketing, and specifically around user experiences. Anybody use Mint or have used Mint? No Mint? Okay. So Mint is a personal financial management tool that got bought by Intuit for $186 million or something like that 6 months ago. Anyway, started a couple years old. At the time, there was a team of 17 people. That's a really big exit, by the way, 17 employees, a couple $100 million. That's successful. What's really cool about Mint is that they built it on somebody else's platform, a platform called Yodlee. And Yodlee had spent years and years and years building this big infrastructure that allowed them to suck in financial and transactional data from almost every bank and financial institution in the country. And Mint came along and really, not to malign Mint, because I think these guys are really, really smart, right? But all they did was put a UI on top of it, right? Because Microsoft Money had been using Yodlee and delivering the same service for 9 years, and Microsoft Money went out of business last year. They shut that down, right? Intuit couldn't compete with Quicken or Quicken Online. That's why they had to go buy Mint. Mint delivered the same product through a radically different interface, which created a radically different experience, right? It was all about how do we help you save money? How do we bring you the best deals? And how do we do it all beautifully in a way that's not intimidating and that feels relevant to the target market? And to the target market for these guys were, anyone under the age of 25 in here? Except for Lauren, I can say this, and you don't hold it against me. But the product was for uneducated, unsophisticated, right? Young folks, under the age of 25. They were looking for 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, it went beyond that, and I know lots of 50-year-olds that use this now. But a great example of UX creating outsized value. I mean, huge multiples on that. Okay. So when crafting UX, one of the things that I have been learning, and I certainly don't understand all of the nuances of it yet, but is the importance of not just content in this generic sense, because in the generic sense, content's everything, but specifically writing, words, right? Which I would argue is probably the most overlooked asset in a website. Now, not the idea of content's not overlooked. Everyone thinks the idea of content's really, really smart, right? But the actual words themselves tend to be kind of relegated to the bottom of the food chain unless there's an agency doing the work for you and they've got copywriters on staff they have to pay. So this is one of my other big gripes, is this don't make the customer think. And there's actually a book, I think, called Don't Make Me Think. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. It's stupid, right? I mean, it is fundamentally, without going on a kind of a political tirade, what's wrong with America? Right? Don't make me think. Just supersize it, right? And just give it to me. I think that's crazy, right? I think customers want to think, and they want to be challenged, and they want to engage, and they want to interact. I'll give you a really good example. Have any of y'all ever bought anything on IKEA's website? Now, I saw your hand went up, and then it went down. Because you've been there, did you buy something?
We went up for the store.
Yeah, exactly. And that's on purpose, right? So IKEA, by design, makes it almost impossible to purchase anything online. They certainly make it impossible to buy everything you want online, right? So if you've got some shelf system, almost everyone's been to an IKEA, right? Okay. You've got some shelf system. You know how it works, right? There's 16 pieces, and now I'm in the warehouse with my thing, and I'm like, oh, sweet. They've got the lower rack in black, and they've got the wheel casters, and they've got the shelves. Now, where are those glass doors? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, we're out of the glass doors, but they'll be back in next Monday, right? They want you to come to the store and eat lingonberry pancakes or whatever it is they have and drink elderflower soda. And, I mean, they've got a daycare for your kids, right? And geographically, the way that they are located was by design. Now, they've begun to kind of change this a little bit. Like in Illinois now, there's like Bolingbrook and Schaumburg, right, which are located less than 2 hours apart. But historically, they never located an IKEA store closer than 6 hours drive. Because the idea was, we want people to make a day of it, right? And let me tell you, brother, customers made a day of it. My wife and I have gone to IKEA's and stayed overnight, right? Because we had so much work to do, right? We've got this big Denali XL with all the seats folded down, and I'm still strapping things to the top of it at the end of the day, right? So you would go and you would spend the entire day there, and it's that Sam's Club phenomenon, right? Where you're like, I know I don't need a 30-gallon drum of pickles, but I am never going to see a deal like this again. And then there you are rolling that 30-gallon drum of pickles to your car. But the point is that IKEA has designed something intentionally to make something more difficult, right? But that's not necessarily bad. People love going to IKEA, right? It's like following the dead, right? It's an experience. You're cooking grilled cheese sandwiches in the parking lot. You're buying T-shirts, you know, and that's why when folks get into this kind of, oh man, it's too complicated, man. We got to make that 4 steps, 1 step, or contextual menus won't work in this application because here's one of, working in the consulting business, I hear this all the time, and it's so funny. I don't care what industry you're in, you think that your customers are the dumbest or the least sophisticated. People go, oh, Kristian, I know. What you don't understand is that people in the insurance industry just don't get it, right? Okay, great. Kristian, you just don't understand. People in interstellar rocket propulsion technology just are not as smart as you think they are, right? And every time, everyone thinks that their little customer segment is just the most stubborn or the least technically sophisticated. It's not true. Yeah, so apologize for the tirade, but IKEA is a great example of that. So getting into kind of the, not really so much the whys, but the hows, I am a big proponent of prototyping and a big detractor of business plans. Is anyone going to South by Southwest in March in Austin, Texas, by the way? No, I don't think so. Well, if you go, I am giving a presentation called My Prototype Beat Up Your Business Plan, and it is going to be awesome. So if anyone's in Texas in mid-March, you should come by and check it out. But the idea here is when you start, so once you finally sell the boss that we're going to take UX seriously, that we're going to get it integrated really, really early in the process, what I would suggest is that you not get mired in this, hey, I've got to prove the value on the front end by typing a whole bunch of stuff and putting it in 3-ring binders and making sure I've got kind of worthless market research to support my assertions. What I would argue is that you just go make something. And you make it as fast as you can, and you use that to sell it. And I will give you some examples. I'm going to give you a lot, but I'm going to start with a couple of ET ones. Did you ever see this? This generation of this?
That was right before I came on.
Okay. So one of the things we did, a really interesting project, was with the CEO of ExactTarget, a guy named Scott McCorkle, who basically said, hey, we've got budget and we've got time. We want you guys to go into a cave and just think about what the future could look like, right? No kind of constraints, no holds barred. Just go figure out what should we be thinking about in the coming years as far as emergent technologies are concerned, how we would visualize that, how we would quantify that, and so on and so forth. We went out. We did not do 2,000 interviews. We talked to 15 customers on the phone. We did not hire an outside marketing research firm. We did our own marketing research, and we did our own synthesis, and we did it fast, and we did it cheap. And then we got to designing. Very high level to begin with, but finishing up with very, very detailed, very, very specific things. Not things that we were saying, hey, this is what it needs to look like in 2 years, but saying, hey, this is how we should be thinking about things in the coming years. We took the same kind of philosophy, and when we built out 360 and designed that, which for the uninitiated is kind of ExactTarget's internal and customer-facing kind of social network. So it's a place, it's really cool. I don't know how many people are on it now, 10,000, 12,000, like 20,000. Yeah, there you go. So not quite Facebook numbers, but getting there, right? Same deal. We had such a truncated timeline that we literally, the very first thing we made, and you guys can't see this because projector isn't allowing us to, but this is a very high fidelity prototype. Basically, to the uninitiated, they would say, okay, it's done. So the very first thing the client saw was something that was completely done. Now, it wasn't really done, right? It just looked done. But it was that tool that allowed us to sell that idea through the entire organization. As a matter of fact, the genesis of this project was, hey guys, we need a place to put all of our training videos. So let's design up essentially a landing page for training videos. And we came back with, no, let's do a social network. That's a true story, right? And we could have never sold it, would have never happened if we hadn't gone straight to prototyping. Okay, so, and I've danced around this a little bit, and am I doing okay on time? Doing? Okay. Okay, I've danced around this a little bit, but I'll give you some more explicit examples about how experience is a bridge between product development and branding and marketing. And I'm telling you, I don't know what it's, maybe you guys live in some type of utopian technology Eden, where those two parties are fully synchronized and get along and have each other's best interests at heart. But in most places, these things are not, brand and product are not synchronized, right? I'm not going to mention APPLE's name again, but that's an example of an organization where they are, right? I will tell you another place where they are, and that's Zappos. So Zappos has a pretty good website, right? I mean, it works. I can buy shoes. I can spin them around sometimes. I can zoom in on them. They've got a big selection. But you know what? Lots of people have that. That is not a world-beating innovation. They've got a really, really great website. Well, congratulations. Building really, really great websites, I would argue, isn't even that difficult, right? So I'm sure I'll get jumped after this. But it's hard, but lots of folks can do it. So what makes Zappos so crazy great? And of course, is it Tony Hsieh? Is that his name? Yeah. Tony Hsieh would tell you it's about culture and hiring the right people, and he's absolutely right. But at the product level, there are some things they have done differently that changes the experience you have with that website. And the most profound one is free shipping. So buying shoes online is a booger. And I should know, because I only wear cowboy boots. And they're very hard to buy online, right? So what I would have to do is order 3 pairs of cowboy boots. And cowboy boots can be expensive, right? So now I've got a nice used motorcycle on my credit card and cowboy boots being shipped to me. And I'd try them on, and then I would send back the other ones, and I would get, I'd pay $50 for that privilege, right? But this was before I moved back to Arkansas. The cowboy boot shopping options in central Indiana are just not what one would expect them to be. Zappos comes along and says, hey, we get it. Shopping for shoes online is tough, right? Because shoes are like underwear, right? I mean, they are personal. Everyone's got a different shaped foot, and they fit differently. And the only time people were buying shoes regularly online is when they were buying the same shoe they'd already purchased at some other point in their life, right? We did some research for a project for Victoria's Secret around called their bra finder, right? Around how people buy bras online. I'm sorry I keep doing this when I'm talking about that. I know it's like a natural, but it's the same thing. People have a very hard time buying bras online because bras, every woman is, all these bras are different. Some have wires and elastic and things that poke. And what they found is that the people who were buying bras online at Victoria's Secret were people who had already purchased one of those bras previously and knew what they were going to get, right? Well, that's not a great way to grow a business, specifically a shoe business, which is totally trend and style driven. So Zappos said, okay, we're going to solve this problem by we're going to send it to you for free. And if you don't want it, we'll send it back to you. You can send it back to us for free. So now I was free to order 3 pairs of shoes, try on the ones I like, and send back the other ones, and it was no skin off my nose. That was a piece of the experience divorced from the technical part of the website, divorced from the aesthetic part of the website, that had the most transformational effect on one's experience in using the website. And that's why when I talk about bridging product and brand, how important it is to get folks in the organization to recognize and keep their eyes open for opportunities that are outside of their domain, right? It's critical for people running the call center to be thinking about how the website works, right? Because they're getting a boatload of calls because the website's busted, right? So they need to be involved in that. And shipping is a really cool, and that's not to knock Zappos's corporate culture and all the other great stuff they do, because apparently it is totally awesome. But I'm telling you, without the free shipping piece, you don't have the same success. Here's another example, and at the risk of sounding self-serving, I've put some examples of work in that our team has done, only because I want you to see that kind of, I don't want to dumb down our value add too much, right? But you don't have to be Apple, right? And you don't have to be Zappos to do these things. This was a firm called Graphite, a local Indianapolis-based company, very, very small team, run by a guy who had sold a consulting company, made a lot of money, kind of looked in the mirror and realized he was 40 pounds overweight, his hair was falling out, he didn't have a tan, it was a nightmare. And he decided, I'm going to get in shape. So he started tracking his exercise and his diet and started having some successes and started thinking, you know what? This is really pretty simple, what I'm doing. If I could somehow kind of productize this, I think there's a business there. Which he's right. Unfortunately, a few thousand other organizations also have the same idea, right? So do a quick Google for weight loss or fitness or nutrition or whatever, and you're just going to be inundated by options. What he did that was a little different, though, and a little more interesting, was he built his on the premise of what's called energy balance, which, believe it or not, is a pretty simple concept, right? Eat less, exercise more, you lose weight. Eat more, exercise less, you gain weight. All about kind of figuring out what it is your particular body needs and then dialing your intake and outtake appropriately. So he launches this thing, it's called iTrack Online, and he's got a few users, and this is a great guy, charismatic guy, smart guy. And he goes, I want some help with the interface. And so he came, and we said, listen, man, you got 1,000 competitors. An interface overhaul ain't going to help, right? I mean, you've got Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers, these behemoths on one end. You've got Calorie King, and I'm not even an attempt to come up with the rest of the list. It's a huge, long, honking list of competitors. But one of the things that was really interesting is that 95% of those were targeted toward women, right? So a disproportionate number of products and services in the weight loss industry are targeted toward women for whatever reason. And we said, well, you know what? There's about as many men as there are women in the world, and almost nobody is focused on them. Why don't we take this, pivot it a little bit, and make it, well, kind of unabashedly masculine. So, I mean, even the website design looks like a freaking, construction hazard sign, right? I mean, it's black, it's yellow, it's manly. We changed the name to Graphite, which we thought was kind of cool, and rebooted the interface. But in addition to that, and so I want to point out kind of the big continuums here, okay? So, hey, we need a UI overhaul. No, what you really need is a shift in focus, a name change, then a UI overhaul. And then we said, and we need some authority to behind this. So we got John and we hired a writer, and we locked them in a room for 2 weeks and made them go write a book called A Few Simple Facts. You can go to mygraphite.com and download that book, or you can get a hard copy version of it. But and it's beautiful, right? And it's simple, right? It's 70 pages, and it's infographic heavy with beautiful illustrations and pithy, witty little sayings. But what it does is it begins to create a continuum, right? So now this isn't just some website floating in the ether. It's a website that was created by a real guy with a real story who's written a real book with a real focus. And I would argue that if you're on a team that's building out a website like this, you should be thinking about that kind of stuff. What else can we do to influence people's perception and experience with the site? Should we go write a book? You know, maybe, maybe not. Book might not be for everybody. So anyway, this is my last slide. The idea is that the best marketing is a well-designed product, right? And a product today is not just a product. It's an experience, because that's what people are buying. And that's not flaky, black turtleneck, beret-wearing designer talk, right? I mean, that is the truth. If you think of any of the kind of important purchases in your life, whether it's deciding what hospital you're going to deliver your baby in, or what kind of car you're going to drive, or what neighborhood you want to live in, you are not just buying products. You are buying entire continuums. And that would be my admonition to the design and technology aficionados in the group, that we begin to think in terms of UX instead of just UI. And that's how you can get a hold of us and me, respectively. I've also left some business cards up here if anybody is interested. So we've got 5 minutes. Any questions? You guys were very patient. I saw almost no nodding off, so that's terrific. Really? That easy? Nothing? There was nothing? There you go. All right.
What was the platform that Mint built off of? What was it called?
Yodely. And so another interesting data point about that is, so they sold for 186 million or 172 million. It was almost 200 million bucks. The total amount of money they spent licensing the Yodely platform, I believe, was like $1.2 million over the entire life of the business, right? And you've seen this happen a lot. This happened with YouTube. I mean, YouTube was built on Adobe's back, little known fact, right? But Flash Video, right? That's what it was built on. Sure, YouTube built the infrastructure to catalog all that, and certainly they paid the bill for hosting and bandwidth delivery, but the fundamental innovation that enabled that, the cheap, affordable, fast transport of high-quality video, was Adobe.
What would your words of advice be for a company that's starting up, kind of like Graphite did, restarting, to find that mix of what to do? Where do you start that thought process?
Well, I feel fairly confident, especially for startups, that if you don't find a point of substantive difference early on, you probably ain't going to make it, right? Unless you're inventing a brand new market. And if you're a category of one, you can do anything you want to, right? So if you figure out how to turn water into rocket fuel, doesn't really matter if the box is pretty or what you call that company, right? But if you're competing in a space where there's lots of other people that look and kind of smell the same, you have to have a point of profound difference. And if you look at Graphite, to me there were two things that were profoundly different about them. One was the change that we wrought, right? Which was going to be, okay, we're going to focus on dudes instead of the ladies, right? Which all of a sudden got rid of 95% of their competitors, right? But the second thing is that it was all about the kind of scrappy underdog real life story, right? It wasn't about some monolithic business parked in Newark, New Jersey, you know, with belching smoke out of the top of the office and a bunch of fat cats smoking cigars, figuring out how to take advantage of, you know, little old Midwesterners. It was a dude who had been there and was willing to tell a story and say, hey, I got fat, I got out of shape, I lost touch with my own health, and I did something about it, and I've figured out how to port that into a tool that you can use as well. And to me, we put a real-life human face on it. That's the role that the book served. So not knowing anything about kind of said business, I would say figure out a way to make the market as small as possible, right? And you do that by focusing. And then identifying what that point of difference is and relentlessly whipping it, right? And so for us, it was the focus on gender and the focus on attaching a personality to the brand. And if you've got something that's completely undifferentiated, and if there is no story, I mean, I don't think you've got a very good business. The good news is, I think usually that story's there. People just have a hard time unlocking it. I've never met anyone that didn't have a great idea. Where most people fail in business is they can't execute, or they don't get out of bed. They never wake up that one day and say, I'm going to do it, right? They just keep planning. That's why I say go build a prototype. Don't write a business plan. Start doing it, and you'll be halfway there. I realize I'm not talking to a group of startup people, too, so if I sound a little rah-rah, you can forgive me. Yeah?
I was just looking back at my notes.
By the way, you know where Ranger boats are made, don't you? That's right. Yep.
I missed the end of something. No, it wasn't. There was something about we don't necessarily design or produce products for what people want.
Right.
Instead,
I have no idea what my exact words were, but the thought behind that is that, and I can go back to the slide, that the thought is you don't give customers what they want necessarily, right? And you realize that sometimes you're going to be making products that people are going to learn to love and that they're not going to love instantaneously. Some of my favorite music is stuff that didn't resonate the first time I heard it, right? Let's see. Yeah, so on what it is, it's creating things that users will learn to love. On what it's not giving people what they say they want, right? And that's fundamental, I think, to any type of product development, marketing, which is being able to, it's what therapists do every day. It's being able to listen to what people say and then decode the real truth out of that. Because the bottom line is most folks are physiologically and psychologically unable to accurately see who they are and articulate what their wants and desires are. Very rarely do people do a good job of even articulating what it is they want. So if you use that as your inputs, you're in big, big trouble. I mean, most great innovations see the light of day in spite of early feedback, not because of it. All right, I think we're out of time. So, thank you.